What's up? Just browsing good old Twitter here. Here's the date, July 30th, 2020. It's the day after the congressional hearings about the from the testimony of the CEOs of the big tech companies, which would be specifically Tim Cook of Apple, Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, um, and two others. I can't. Oh, Jeff Bezos of Amazon, and then the CEO of Google, who I can't quite pronounce his name correctly, so I'm not going to try, but with all due respect. And what I thought was funny was the day before yesterday was, of course, the grilling of AG Barr, Attorney General Bill Barr, and the Senate Judiciary Committee just totally unleashed on him, which was pretty entertaining in my opinion. Very interesting. Looked like a little bit of like, or a lot of political kabuki, but regardless of that, they definitely dug in on these CEOs, which I was like, hey, that's cool. Whether or not things pan out like they really should, probably is another story. There's of course a whole chain linking of events that have to take place, a la Roger Stone. Um, you know, they had to put quite a bit of effort to get him behind bars or at least a commuted sentence. So that's just an individual. These are companies with tons of money and political power and stuff. So not very likely that much more than a small slap on the wrist that would be manipulated to their own advantage, of course, like we so often see with antitrust situations. But anyway, that is not trending on Twitter today. It wasn't trending on Twitter yesterday either, but my point was that the AG Bar thing was, and that's how I even found out that was going on at all. I was like, oh, AG Bar is getting grilled, and I wasn't even a fan of AG Bar at all. Um, wasn't necessarily a hater, but just nothing really appealing about him from any of his media presence or anything like that. So I didn't really take too much interest, but I ended up, because of the blurbs I was seeing, I ended up going and watching all nearly 5 hours of his testimony and walked away with a lot more respect for him in general. I thought he answered most of the questions well, even some of the ones that may have seemed like there was the question where he seemed to backpedal on whether or not soliciting or receiving any sort of foreign assistance whatsoever was acceptable. And at first he answered, well, it depends on the circumstances. And if you look into it, which I did, um, there are circumstances or routes you could say that somebody could accept that type of a thing and get away with it. Supposedly, I don't quote me on it, but I'm pretty sure Hillary that most of her money was pretty much known to come from outside of the United States during her campaign, and I don't see anybody making a big deal about that. But anyway, of course, yeah, they grilled Bill Barr, and he was trending about it negatively, of course. And here we are, the day of the hearing. If you, which was yesterday for the CEOs, if you would go to this twitter.com/explore, then right here was a picture of Trump getting off of a helicopter saluting, and it said, that they're removing like 12,000 or so troops from Germany, which I personally didn't even know that those troops are there. I didn't click through on it and read about it, but I think like, is that a big deal? I mean, I'm sure it's of some significance. I'm not trying to play it up or down necessarily, but the fact of like, why is that a headline? And that seemed to be a headline. I don't remember really checking the headline until towards the evening, but I checked it several times, and that one stayed there. And it was pretty neutral, which was surprising because I can't remember ever seeing a neutral Trump headline or trend or anything on Twitter. It always seems to be biased towards like Trump's a bastard or something to that effect, or why we hate Trump, or just something ridiculous. And it will say it's trending even if it's just barely at over 1,000 tweets supposedly. And there's some weird stuff going on with Twitter, to say the least. So I'll scroll down here, and there's this promoted stuff. They're really pushing John Lewis. They've been pushing, um, and you can see right here is another John Lewis thing, which I'm not saying that he's not worthy of a trend, but that's just sort of something political. And then here's another John Lewis thing. That one supposedly has over 500,000 tweets, which I think a, that's genuinely trending, whether or not it was a grassroots trend to begin with or not. Um, that's definitely, once you get into the hundred thousands of tweets, I think that would count as a trend. But where you get here, Obama was better at everything. Just a couple thousand tweets, and then you've got to almost think that because say that might have been trending at like 1,500 tweets or something, for instance, that maybe those tweets and retweets had doubled because it landed on the trending page, just as a hypothesis. And then, of course, this is promoted by Michelle Obama. So there's obviously money getting pumped in. I have to think that maybe behind the scenes there could be some sort of influence getting pumped in that's pushing this left narrative that I've been seeing. I've been seeing on Twitter for a long time now. This is, of course, in the heat of the summer of an election year, to say the least. So nothing on the main Explore page, which has a lot of trends and promotions and stuff like that. And then if I go over here and click on trending, so of course a lot of the same stuff, which is to be expected. Um, it's leaning pretty left, and this is something that I think we've all noticed with Twitter. Bill Clinton's trending, supposedly, with all of this, and so it's like, why isn't that testimony of the big tech CEOs, like, I think that's relevant to even Twitter. So what I thought I'd do is a little experiment here and see nothing to do with them. I mean, even old white guy Bill Barr was trending, even though it was in a negative light. It seemed like, like, and nothing about these CEOs. Give me a break. And then then they ran a neutral Trump thing yesterday too, like, oh, just to make the right wing, the conservatives, happy, supposedly. So like, oh, hey, we didn't bash Trump today, so like, don't hate us, don't mention this. I'm going to mention this. Twitter is a huge influence, and the thing that, with this whole spike of divide in the country, it feels like what they're doing is they're getting us into our own echo chambers. They're trying to polarize us, get us to pick a left or right, supposedly quote unquote left or quote unquote right, and then we're forced to go into those echo chambers. So uh, a lot of the people are getting banned or severely blocked on Twitter that are conservative voices, and it's quite obvious. And at the same time, those so-called liberal voices, I consider myself a nonpartisan. I think we all are at heart. We could definitely identify with things on both sides of the aisle, so to speak. Um, but these so-called lefties, which in a lot of ways I identify with the left, in a lot of ways I can identify with conservatism as well. They're being allowed to do things. Like, there was one person who had called an African American or a black person, for lack of better terms, that is a Trump supporter, wears a MAGA hat. They called her a soggy Oreo because she was a Trump supporter. And I had to make a new account, and when I made a new account and I saw that, I reported that tweet, and I said, I think this is basically hate speech. That's the category, if I remember correctly, that I put it under. You know what I mean? Because it's like an Oreo. She was a lighter skinned black person. Michelle Tate, the right Melissa, at the right Melissa on Twitter. And I just felt like, what? What if, what if somebody said, like, you're just a pale cracker, or, you're just you're just a soggy cracker to a white person. Or if they said like, I don't even want to make examples, but I'm sure you can use your imagination to think of examples that could be said to people of various races that is just uncalled for, especially when, so-called Black Lives Matter movement going on, which that is, give me a break. That their money is going towards, that's a political front. In all honesty, it really is. It's a political front. I've shown this before, but if you go to BLM, and then I go to Black Lives Matter, and at the top, donate. And then scroll down. It's an Act Blue charity, qualified tax exempt organization. Now, the only way a charity is supposed to be able to be tax exempt is if the majority, like 51+% of their donations, go to non-political contributions. That means it can't go to a candidate or a political party or anything like that, right? Um, so that's weird that Act Blue still has their tax exempt status, because 95+% of the donations are contributed to political stuff through Act Blue. So it's totally bizarre. There you go. Contributions. Almost $1.5 billion. See, that's 1,401 million. So that's $1,401 million, which is about $1.4 billion. And then you look over here, they 25,000 to media, 88,000 to campaign expenses. This is basically their overhead, you could say, administrative, salaries, all that. They're not even, what, 15 million is the most they spend on anything. That's their own salaries. So there's nothing like any kind of so this is their contributions right here, right? 98.3% goes to contributions. Well, let's scroll down and see what kind of here's breakdowns of the administrative costs. Try and scroll through that kind of slow so you can get an idea of that. And you can see contributions coming up here is 1 billion. You got hundreds, thousands, millions, billions, right? So over $1 billion, just over $1 billion to federal candidates. You know what I mean? Contributions to federal candidates. So that right there should disqualify them from, out of that $1.4 billion, 1 billion of it has gone directly to federal candidates. Give me a break. See here. So as far as I can discern from this, since up here they put the highest, they prioritize it highest to lowest, but it doesn't look like this looks like it's in addition to the 1 billion. So there you've got 173 million contributions to committees, contributions to that. And what kind of political parties are they contributing to? Kind of scroll through this so you can pause and look at anything specific if you want to. So of these federal candidates, maybe it's on both sides of the aisle, right? Well, it's not, sorry to say. Here's the specifics. If you do break down those top contributions, it's Bernie 2020, all lefty stuff. Bernie, Biden, Warren, top 3, which I think are probably household names, pretty close to household names at this point. Everything Democratic. There's zero conservatism, which they're allowed to do that, but the thing is they are not allowed to operate as a tax exempt nonprofit by doing this. So that's Act Blue as a whole, which should be taking a lot more. They kind of like take the burden of handling all this from off of Black Lives Matter so-called movement. Additionally, if Black Lives Matter, which of course they do, then why do we need to use that same catchphrase? That phrase is binding it to that the BLM organization. Why can't we just say that black people matter, or like how some people say all Black Lives Matter, or anything? If you try and change that wording to make it more inclusive or anything against the BLM movement, then they'll attack. They'll attack, and they've got their huge brainwashed cult out there that's attacking people, and I'll say that. You know what I mean? I feel like I'm not doing anybody in any injustice by saying that whatsoever. There is a brainwashed cult of people out there chanting the narrative of an organization that's ran by people who all let you look up and decide for yourself about them. Um, I would encourage people to, just how like a lot of people are scared about globalism and stuff. We're scared about monopolies, things like that, where things monopolize on situations, and there's not sort of like this. There's ups and downs to a fragmentation, So if we were to have a more fragmented, like other organizations that we could contribute to in addition to BLM, I mean, if somebody wants to contribute to BLM and they've read into it and they say, hey, I don't care what you say, I feel like I like Democratic candidates. I'm all about the organization. You go to the thing and you chant. I'm not trying to be derogatory by saying brainwashed zombies. If you truly have stepped outside of your box and thought about it, and that's the choice you're intelligently making, then I respect that decision, and I'll back your right to free speech and all that for sure. But otherwise, I just think it should be more decentralized. I think that's a big worry for things. And like I said, go look at the people who lead the organization and some of their more senior ranking members and stuff like that. And there's some stuff to question there. So I don't think that they should be the sole hand over the money and decisions that go into uh, I think the black community, even though there is sort of this general idea of a black community, just like you could say there's a cultural thing to America itself, regardless of race. Like, that's something that is part of the way that we coexist with all of each other. Is that we do, I mean, even the word cult is just the word cultural, culture. Just, it's like a nickname for saying culture to kind of like separate it from, I guess, a bigger, more general culture at large. So really, even the whole world, you could say, is part of one big giant cult in some degree. And, by the fact that, like, most of us are against killing each other, I want to say. So that's, for better or worse, I think it's for better, that's a cult idea. It's like, whatever, we're prescribing to this thing of, like, the golden rule that treat others how you'd like to be treated and stuff, and that's a cultural ideology, or you could say a cult ideology, and it's not necessarily bad, But the thing is that if somebody else wants to have another idea and say, no, I think we should kill people, there's people who are for the death penalty or whatever, and that's technically not saying that every single, that we shouldn't kill everybody um, across the board. That's saying that there's an exception to that rule. Whether or not we agree with it, somebody should be allowed to say that. Whether or not they carry out actions based on that and how they carry out those actions and what decisions are behind those actions, that's definitely where there's a lot of argument to be made. I feel like, of course, that like there should be at least a fair trial for somebody, right? We would hope, if they were going to be facing those potential penalties like a death penalty or something like that. So I think that goes for everybody. I think that BLM, just because I say that, hey, look at this and point this out, it's to each their own with the decision making process. I would encourage anybody to always be, never take any one source of advice as the be all end all. Always question it. That's the way science is supposed to work, right? Science is the questioning of things. So anyway, um, with Twitter, if we go down in that trending one more time, there's nothing trending about that. So I just feel like, well, why isn't it trending? You know, that should be a big deal and stuff. And obviously we're seeing a lot of bias, and I think the most bias is coming from Twitter. They were the ones that were absent from that the testimony from the antitrust panel yesterday, which I feel like all the companies should be there and stuff. Um, and Twitter, especially in one regard. The other companies obviously have like a bigger market cap and stuff like that, to my knowledge. I haven't checked it in a while. I think they have a far bigger market cap. So yeah, they're definitely, maybe it almost seems like too little too late with them in a lot of situations. But with Twitter, the antitrust, I mean, specifically, it doesn't have to necessarily have to do with market cap. It's it's deceptive business practices is what it boils down to. In general, to my understanding, if looking up the definition and stuff, which I'll do, antitrust, and I'll search that out on Wiktionary. Opposed or against establishment or existence of trust monopolies, usually referring to legislation. Huh. I wonder where I saw that other definition. Let's just go to DuckDuckGo in general. Opposing. So, fair competition, stuff like that. Unlawful restraints, protect commerce from unlawful restraints, stuff like that. So what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to punch in something to try and queue up and see if we get tens of thousands of tweets on CEOs testify. Oh, I guess they don't give us a running total of what it is. But this is where you could probably, using some similar search terms, you could see that there's a lot to do with that. I'm going to come up here and just put CEOs. See what we get here. Nothing too fancy. It's like CEOs testify. I mean, and there's always the chance too that it just generally isn't trending, but I just think that's pretty suspect that it wouldn't be. Down here, it's not really getting a ton. This thing off Politico's not getting a ton of retweets. This guy has broken the 1,000 hearts. Got a handful of retweets. Okay, right here we're getting into 1,500 retweets. Just on, that's just her sharing of this particular deal. I don't know. I've got to think, okay, here's something that's definitely them. My first opt is when hard to claim. CEO Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Google. So yeah, that one's broken 1,000 in both of them there. So I think, according to Twitter's style of doing things, it seems like, this should be trending, even if it's at the bottom of the list. I mean, give me a break, right? So it's totally suspect. And by putting us in these echo chambers, we don't get to hear other viewpoints, which sucks. I've been blocked off of Twitter on my regular account. I don't have a cell phone, so I can't get the text verification. I just have a landline, which apparently isn't good enough to them. And it was fine with Google. With YouTube, they were able to just give me a call with a person that said, your code is da 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 da, and I punched that in and everything was fine. But I have to imagine that Twitter wants to do some cross-checking with people's data and track them and where they go with those cell phones and all that kind of stuff. I mean, why else would they require a cell phone over a landline? With a landline, all you can get is maybe, I don't know, is probably a ton less information, I would think, off of a landline. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out, so thanks for checking that out.